Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1988 comedy sequel, Police Academy 5, Assignment Miami Beach. Now, this is where the quality of the franchise, to me, takes a permanent vacation. It does not get any better. In fact, it just gets worse, especially when you get to Mission to Moscow. And it wastes what could have been a fun premise. Having the police academy grads outside their comfort zone, going to Miami and getting involved in new shenanigans in a new location. And it's a waste because of a multitude of factors. For one, this is really where the franchise feels like it's starting to run its course creatively, and when it comes to a lot of other aspects of the production or people involved with it. And there is also the Gutenberg Effect. And what I mean by that is that this is the first film in the series that didn't feature Steve Gutenberg in the cast as Mahoney. And I know some fans of Police Academy feel that it was a seamless transition. I highly disagree. Mahoney is my favorite character in the series. And Steve Gutenberg just has this undeniable charisma and charm that no one else in this cast has. In a lot of ways, he's the glue for the entire cast. And you can work without Kim Cattrall, for instance, from the first movie, or some of the other cast members. But you can't really replace Mahoney, and they never did. They never found an adequate replacement for Steve Gutenberg. And as a result, there's just a massive gaping hole in this cast, and the movie just never really successfully fills it, and it just decides to trudge along like everything's fine. Like Mahoney wasn't that important, or Steve Gutenberg wasn't that vital to the success of the series. And all you have to do is look at the box office receipts. I mean, this is the first one that, yeah, it won opening weekend, but then it completely dive bombed afterwards. And it became the first Police Academy film that really didn't do that well financially. And then it just progressively got worse and worse when it comes to uh, the box office. It's the Gutenberg effect. As soon as Steve Gutenberg left the cast and was no longer a part of the franchise, uh, the films stopped being as profitable and they stopped being as good. It doesn't help either that you have a lame duck director in Alan Myerson, who is the epitome of just a guy who you find on a list and then give him a job and call it a day. The guy cut his teeth doing television work and sitcoms, and to be fair, so did a lot of the other people who directed the previous films in this series. But I gotta be honest, I think that they did a better job making those films feel like they were movies and not just an extended episode of a sitcom or just a TV special. This cost $14 million dollars, and it looks like it barely cost $4 million. It looks like it was shot for the small screen, and it just looks really cheap. It looks rushed. It just doesn't really have the same pop visually as some of the other films in the series do. The direction is very tired and lackadaisical and just going through the motions. Even in scenes that should be fun, like the beach sequences, they're shot in a way that just makes them rather lifeless. And it doesn't really matter what they try to do with the soundtrack or with some of the editing. It still just looks like they're trying to compensate for the direction's lack of energy and vitality. The only time that there's anything remotely ambitious in terms of the direction is maybe during a few of the action sequences and the climax that were shot in the Everglades. Other than that, so much of this is just so flat and just so dull when it comes to the directing. It really hurts whatever attempts that they try to do in terms of the comedy or the pratfalls or the pranks or the shenanigans. And yeah, you can see why Myerson didn't really direct a lot of feature films again after this. I don't even know if he did direct another feature film after this. I think this was the last one that he did, and for good reason. And he was not able to make up for the loss of Mahoney either when it comes to his own direction. Like I said, he didn't rise to the occasion. He wasn't able to fill that hole with some lively direction. Instead, it was just typical run of the mill uh, stuff. The script wasn't much better by Stephen Kerwick. The concept, like I said, of getting the grads out of their comfort zone and moving them out of the city and bringing them to Miami, that's a fun idea, but in execution, it's mostly terrible. Because there's a good chunk of the movie where there's just no drive to it. It's just a lot of scenes that just feature things happening. Stuff happens on the beach with the police academy grads. There's no stakes, but stuff happens. And a lot of the stuff is just boring and forgettable or lame. Like the repeated attempts to try to make the insult dork into something that is just a killer roast. Because there's a repeated gag where Harris just keeps getting called a dork. And I'm like, who wrote this? A 7-year-old? Like, that's your best insult? Calling him a dork? And there's some moments with the police academy grads that I don't mind. There's a fun scene with Tackleberry and Callahan at a shooting range. There's a scene with Hooks that I thought was pretty charming and fun. And there's some moments during the climax in the Everglades that I didn't mind. But so much of the movie is just these beach scenes that are just grounded and don't go anywhere because there's no drive behind them. Like for example, there's a scene where Hightower and Hooks and all some of these other members of the police academy, they're playing volleyball on the beach and there's no stakes or anything. They're just playing volleyball. It's like, okay, have them like make a bet or something. Have them on actual teams. Like why do this and like not really provide them with any stakes to work with? And other than Commandant Lassard being kidnapped by these jewel thieves, there really aren't any stakes. And that whole subplot sucks because there's no tension, because you never buy that Lassard is in any sort of real danger. Because of the way that the thieves are written, they're bumbling, they're a bunch of twits. And I mean, they got the bag with the jewels mixed up with Lassard's bag, and they try and fail repeatedly to get the jewels back, which are hidden in this video camera. And you would think that even with that aspect of the plot, okay, you would build that up to the end, but the writer doesn't even do that. Like that gets resolved like halfway through the movie. So then you're just left with this really lame kidnapping thing where Lassard is so oblivious he thinks that the kidnappers are actors, because there's this whole tradition with the police officers when he goes to get recognized or goes to the award ceremony every year, and they do this whole thing where they prank the winner with a fake scenario, and so he just thinks that this is all just an act, and that might work all right if you didn't overdo it. Like you had like a few scenes here and there where the Sard is like, oh, great acting, but the script just overdoes it to the point where it feels like a dead horse. And then when you get to the finale where the grads are trying to save Lassard with the jet boats and everything, that is undermined by the fact that they don't really accomplish that much. I think they catch the other two members of the gang, but when it comes to the leader of the gang, Lassard defeats him rather easily in like 2 seconds as soon as one of his grads tells him that, oh, by the way, uh, they're real criminals. And then he snaps out of it real quick. He's like, oh, real criminals. And then, takes out the bad guys. And I know there's this stuff involving Harrison Proctor and Harris is trying to get on the good graces of the people that are essentially watching him because he's in place to take over as commandant at the police academy because he found out that Lassard was too old and was supposed to retire. So he let the higher ups know about that. So he's taking advantage of that so he can replace Lassard. And so he's trying to have this whole thing where he gets on the good graces of the police academy grads and winds up impressing them enough as well as his higher ups that he gets the job. But of course, in typical fashion, he doesn't get it, and Lassard winds up keeping his job. So that whole thing just kind of just feels like there's no point to it either. And yeah, there's the whole stuff with uh um the Miami trip and why Lassard's going to Miami because he's getting voted in as police officer of the year. I don't know why, but that's just an excuse for him to go to Miami and bring his grads with him. And there are new recruits as well in Nick Lassard and Kate Stratton, but they don't add much of anything to the movie and or to the story, and neither does some of the returning new recruits like House, who early on in the film winds up graduating from the police academy. So now he's an official police officer, but he's just a big, heavy waste of space in this film for the most part. And Nick Lassard and Kate Stratton, this is just really tepid, weak leftovers of a role that was supposed to be for Mahoney. And when it comes to Lassard, for instance, not for he, Mahoney wasn't supposed to be Kate Stratton as well, but you know what I mean. It's these weak tepid leftovers that were supposed to be for a different actor. So they have this other guy, and I'll talk about Matt McCoy later, but even if Steve Gutenberg was playing this character and doing these scenes, they still wouldn't be much of anything because they're just so lame. And the villains are the epitome of lame and just completely forgettable and not intimidating. And I know it's Police Academy and they're not necessarily supposed to be intimidating. But at this point, switch things up a little bit. Maybe give them kind of an intimidating foe. Somebody who can kind of instill some fear into some of the members. Like even Hightower is kind of intimidated by the bad guy or something. Some different sort of wrinkle to throw into the mix instead of just this same shtick. Like, what is the point of just doing the same shtick for the fifth time, but this time in Miami? Like the change of locale isn't enough of a difference in approach to really make this feel like it's something worthwhile. And the cast, the returning members of the police force, the police academy grads, they do the best that they can with what they have to work with here, which is not much at all. Uh, Michael Winslow, David Graf, Bubba Smith, Marion Ramsey, Leslie Easterbrook, George Gaynes, G.W. Bailey, Lance Kinsey, they all still have good chemistry with one another. You can still tell that they're having some fun doing another movie, but because the material is just so weak when it comes to what they're given, it just leads to a lot of performances that don't really stand out. And if they do stand out, they stand out in the worst way, like with Matt McCoy, for instance, as Nick Lassard. I don't know what they were thinking. This guy is not a bad actor, but he cannot play a charming, lovable troll like Mahoney, because that's really what Mahoney was. He was a total troll, and he pulled it off because he was so charismatic and charming. And despite the fact that he's kind of a dick, if you think about it, he had that quality to him that balanced those aspects of his personality out. Matt McCoy has no on-screen charisma in this. He's a total flop, and the fact that he's just given these poor man's Mahoney bits just makes it even harder to watch his scenes because the man just cannot do comedy. He's fine when it comes to roles outside of the uh uh zany silly comedy route. He's not the guy who's going to pull off snark. He's not the guy who's going to pull off playing the charming wise ass. That does not fit him at all. And it really does show when it comes to his scenes in this. Janet Jones is fine, but there's really not much to her character. And Rene Aberjounis, I don't know how to pronounce his name. I'm just gonna call him Rene. Uh, Apparently he loved doing this. He had a lot of fun. Cool, to each their own. I thought the performance was just so hammy it hurt. I feel the same way about Archie Hahn and Ed Covens and any of the other members of his gang. Just didn't care for any of them. I thought they were all equally terrible. They had no chemistry. They were just a bunch of irritating, annoying knuckleheads. And just felt like they were trying too hard to be silly. And that's another problem with some of the performances. At times, even some of the stalwarts or the previous stalwarts of this cast feel like they're just forcing things. They're trying too hard to be goofy or silly. And I think it's because they're trying to fill the shoes collectively of Mahoney, of Steve Gutenberg, and they can't do it. A lot of these other members of this cast, no offense, Michael Winslow and David Graf and Bubba Smith and Marion Ramsey and Leslie Easterbrook, but even all of them combined do not have the same level of charisma as Steve Gutenberg. And they're better when they are side characters, when they are part of an ensemble cast, not when they're asked to carry the film. They're not strong enough to carry the movie. At least not to me personally. And it's not like the other technical aspects of the film are that terrific either. I mean, the cinematography by James Pergola is just mediocre at best. It's all right. There's a couple nice shots of Miami and of the beach and of the Everglades. The editing by Herbert C. De La Bouillier is a mixed bag sometimes. It's not uh, that bad. Sometimes it actually looks pretty decent, helps the scene move along a little bit, maybe even improves a little bit of the comedic timing, what little of it there is in a scene. But then there's other times where it just falls flat. And then you have the score, which is once again done by Robert Folk, who composed the other previous films. And I appreciate that he's trying to do something different again here with more of a beach flavor when it comes to some of the music. And there are a lot more synths, but that's not his wheelhouse. And at least to some moments of the score that are really not up to par, and are just pretty poor. I'm sorry, in terms of how they fit in the scene. They don't add to the scene, they detract from it because it just becomes a little distracting. And I don't really feel the main theme is utilized enough. So it's just a weird, kind of awkward score. It's like a mix of some familiar elements from Police Academy and this other stuff that Robert Folk is trying to experiment with. And I just don't think it ultimately is something that works. And I think as a whole, it just doesn't really work, period. It gets bogged down too much when it comes to bad comedy, like the airport scene with the Sard and his golf bag, and people slipping on his balls. Ha ha! That's hilarious. People are slipping and falling all over Lassard's balls. It's the funniest shit ever. Or the bit with Michael Winslow's uh uh Jones character making airport security beeping noises as Harris is going through. Like, we haven't seen that joke done a million times. And there's just a lot of that. It's bogged down with bad comedy and a bad plot and just cliched, generic elements, and it's just a bad movie. But it's not bad enough that I hated every minute of it and I wanted to bang my head through a wall. But it's still a very forgettable, below average entry in this franchise, and definitely one of the weaker comedy sequels that I can think of. Not quite as weak as Mission to Moscow, but still pretty weak. But anyway, that's my review of Assignment Miami Beach. And until next time, I'll see you later. See ya.